This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of August 8th, 2022. And the subject this week, this one gets me. It really steams me. The subject this week is there is no such thing as a 250-mile antenna. You know, I was looking over the weekend, and as you can imagine, my Google News preferences get kind of mixed up with what I do for a living and between that and my personal life. And so I get a lot of recommendations for antenna guides and satellite TV and all this great stuff that we do at solidsignal.com. But I do check them out from now and again because it's great fodder for articles for the Solid Signal blog or just finding out what the competition is doing, that sort of thing. And I encourage you, by the way, to read as much as you can, listen as much as you can. Don't take the word of one person, even if it's me. You should really get all the information that you possibly can before making a decision. And therefore, you will know that you have done the right thing. Anyway, there was this prominent website from a publishing organization that's been around for something like 45, 50 years. I don't want to name their name because I'm angry at them and I don't want to give them free publicity. But you can probably find them. You can probably search out using some of the terms that I'm going to give you right now. And it was a guide to what they felt were the best antennas. I had hoped, of course, that some of our extreme signal antennas would be there, or perhaps some of the Telebez antennas or Antop antennas that we feature. The top one that they were recommending was a no-name brand flat antenna about the size of a notebook that claimed 250-mile range. Another one of the antennas that they said was fantastic claimed 125-mile range. Now, first of all, it's really clear that this was written by somebody who did a lot of internet research and didn't do any real research, because if they had tried to use either of these antennas to get reception at anything like those distances, they would have failed. Absolutely flat out failed. No question at all. Because why? Because you cannot, under most circumstances, use a TV antenna to get reception from more than about 75 to 100 miles. Now, 75 is a pretty good number. 100 is one of those, special circumstances. I have a giant antenna and I've put it up on a really tall mast kind of thing. And I've written about this. I've talked about this. I could point you to blog articles that I've written about it. But I'm going to lay it out to you. You just can't get reception from that distance for a lot of good reasons. First of all, here's the math. There's something called the rule of squares. It says the power of a signal decreases by 3/4 for every time you double the distance. So in other words, if you go from 100 feet to 200 feet, then you lose 3/4 of the signal you were getting. It doesn't matter what the numbers are that you start with. Anytime you double the distance, you lose 3/4 of the signal. So imagine if you're already at that tail end of just where you're at 75 miles. And all of a sudden you double that and you're now 150 miles away. So you've lost 3/4 of the usable signal already at 150 miles. There's going to be nothing there. You're just going to get nothing but noise. The signal is just going to be too weak. You start out with a 50,000 watt broadcast signal, and already by the time you're 40 miles away, you're at a tenth or less of a watt. And then you're going to take that, 40 miles, and you're going to quadruple that distance or quintuple that distance, and you think there's going to be signal. It's not going to happen. The second thing is these little antennas are really not capable of that kind of reception. Yes, you can use a small antenna to get reception from, 35, 40, sometimes 50 miles away. They're pretty good, pretty sensitive. And I got to say, the technology out there is pretty impressive. But you can't get them from more than that. Why? Because they're not big enough to pick up a significant amount of signal. And antenna works best when it is an even fraction of the size of the signal that you're trying to pick up. For example, if you're trying to pick up VHF channel 7 is about 6 feet wide. That's how long that wave is. That is the wave length. So you're going to get pretty good signal reception from an antenna that's 3 foot wide. You'll get okay signal reception from one that's a foot and a half wide. But you start looking at an antenna where the elements are like 8 inches wide, you're not getting good reception. You're just not. It's just not possible. So the size of the antenna is not going to work. The overall idea of distance from the power point of view is not going to work. And the final thing that you need to consider is literally the curvature of the Earth. By the time you're 250 miles away, the curvature of the Earth has blocked a lot of those signals. It's just not going to happen. I will say that there are cases, for example, you can get AM radio signals from 250 miles away pretty routinely, but that's because of the characteristic of those very low frequency signals. AM radio signals are a lot lower frequency than TV signals, and they have a tendency to bounce around, bounce off the clouds, back down to the ground, back up to the clouds, back down to the ground. And because they are such long waves compared to television, they tend to not lose as much power in the early stages. Yes, they still have the rule of squares, but it's just, the amount of energy that you can use to get usable signal is a lot better. And so AM is a different situation from television. In television, you're just not going to get signal from 250 miles. A lot of that signal is going to go off into space. A lot of it is going to be blocked by the ground because of the curvature of the Earth. It's just not going to happen, my friends. It's just not going to happen. And I'll take you a little further too. Well, you say, well, these are really powerful amplified antennas and therefore they don't need to be as big. Well, that's true as long as you're receiving some signal. Today's low noise preamplifiers are pretty amazing. You can get really good results from a small amplified antenna like the Televez Dynova. It really boggles the mind how good it is. And I got to say, I'm really impressed with that stuff. Super clean amplification, but you have to have a signal to amplify. Remember, if the signal is too weak to find by the time you're 250 miles out, there's nothing to amplify. So therefore, an amplifier doesn't make a difference. Look, my friends, you can tell that I'm agitated about this because we have been talking about this myself personally for over a decade, and it's just a shame. It's a shame that you have these relatively well-known websites that are putting out this false information basically because they are not doing their own research. They're Googling stuff, and that's all they're doing. They're not doing tests. They're not going under controlled conditions. I test antennas the best I can, and believe me, I wish I had a $500,000 facility to do it, but at the very least, I always test them under the same circumstances from the same location, similar weather conditions, using this, a meter that actually measures what's going on. I don't just take their word for it. When websites like this do this, not only are they diminishing their own trustworthiness, they're diminishing the trustworthiness of all the other websites like solidsignal.com that try to put out this kind of information. It is a real shame when they're just taking the manufacturer's word for it that it's a 250-mile antenna. That's just flat out absurd. I mean, what if I told you my car could go 250 miles an hour? You'd want to know for sure that I could do it. Especially, let's say I had a 1986 Hyundai and I told you it could go 250 miles an hour. You'd look at me a little bit funny, right? Well, this is essentially what they're doing when they're saying a notebook-sized antenna can get reception from 250 miles. It's just not gonna happen. When you want to know the real story about antennas, you want to talk to some experts. You don't want to just use companies that are Googling information or just telling you what the manufacturer told them. You want people who are doing real tests. And let me tell you, the person who does the real antenna test for Solid Signal, it's me. I'm the one. I'm the one who's sitting there erecting the antennas, putting them all together, figuring out whether or not it's easy to put them together or not, doing all the tests over and over again, comparing it, crunching the numbers. When you want to know what's going on with an antenna or with anything else, you want to talk to the experts. That's why people go to solidsignal.com, because we're a company full of experts. We don't just Google stuff. We don't just tell you a bunch of malarkey so that we can sell you an antenna, because we know if you don't like it, you're just going to return it anyway. It's not worth it. So look, I'm rambling on. It's been over 10 minutes, and you can tell I still got a big old head of steam on. If you want real truth when it comes to antennas, call the folks at Solid Signal. 888-233-7563, and they'll give you the straight dope. If there's nothing that's going to be able to help you, we'll tell you. If it's way beyond what's capable, we'll tell you. If there are other alternatives you hadn't thought of, we'll let you know. Give us a call at 888-233-7563, and we'll tell you why there is no 250-mile antenna and why you shouldn't trust somebody who says there is. That's about it for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. I think I'm going to go take an Ambien and maybe have a libation of some sort. I'll see you next week, and I promise that I'll have calmed down by then. In the meantime, have a great week. Like and subscribe makes me look good to my bosses, and thanks for listening.